Welcome to the social nature of the human person. In the previous classes, we have been working through a reading that you had assigned, in which there were two halves. The first half was the dignity of the human person, and the second half is the social nature of the human person. And the social nature of the human person has its foundation in the image of God, specifically God as Trinity. As we've seen before in the dignity of the human person, and specifically in the presentation of the image of God, we made sure that we understood that God is Trinity. And since the Trinity is a communion of persons, the Trinity is one God, three persons, an eternal communion of divine persons in perfect love. Humans, we have to understand, are made in that image, the image of the Trinity, which is a communion of persons. So humans are made, first of all, to share in that divine life. That's the reason that humanity was made. We were made to share in the divine life, which means we were made inherently to be social, at the very least, with the divine, with God. And because of that, all humans were created in that way. And if all humans were created inherently to share in the communion of persons with the Trinity, then it stands to reason that we are inherently communal beings with one another, because we would be united with that same God, along with everyone else who would be united with that same God. All humans would be united in that way, and so would kind of, if you think of it quantitatively, increase the amount of persons that would be in communion. And so it's very evident that from the image of God as Trinity, that humans are inherently communal beings, not only with the divine, but with one another. Not to mention, if you take a step back and look at human procreation, it's very clear that we are communal beings. First of all, the structure of our bodies are complementary, male and female, and thus we are made for union with one another in the procreative act. Second of all, procreation by its very nature is the begetting of human life, which requires two individuals, so that we can all say we exist solely because two other persons in a procreative act had a child. And so automatically, when we look at ourselves as independent as we think we are, want to be, we are dependent, and inherently social towards, at the very least, the parents that brought us into this world. Also, those humans exist for us. So parents exist for us. It is their responsibility to bring us up, to sustain our lives, especially for such a long dependency period as a child. And so for humans to thrive after birth requires the work of a small community, namely the family, or even a larger society as well, especially those who are outcast or orphaned. Which brings us to a couple of offshoots of the idea of the human person as a social being. So once we start getting into the human person as a social being, we start looking at how should humans work together? How should morality be seen in a social context? The first principle of the social nature of the human person is known as subsidiarity. This is essentially defined as the principle by which higher units of society should not interfere with lower units. Higher units should simply support the lower units. Basically, if we use the analogy of the United States of America, you have the federal government, the state government, and the local government. Um, and there are things that the federal government should be in charge of. There are things that the federal government should take control over, like going to war. That should be a national thing. That should not be something that the state should be able to declare. It would seem absolutely and patently absurd for just a few states to declare war with a whole nother country without the authorization of the entire nation. Um, Likewise, there are things that the states should govern, things that pertain to their states, and the local governments, the city governments. There are things that are rightly in their purview. The speed limit of a particular street in a small town should probably not be governed by the federal government. That should be something that's probably set by the city, who knows their constituency, who knows the circumstances of that particular road in their society. So we there should be a division of responsibility, and all of this idea of subsidiarity is based upon the fact that the individual human person is the principle, the subject, and the object of society. The principle. What do we mean by the principle? The source from which all society flows. Right. The society could not exist without the individual human person. So you can never neglect the individual human person. Also, for society to function, the individual human person has to be active in the society, has to be a subject who is willing to engage in society. And also, the human person is the object of society. This is the one that's often forgotten. Society exists for the benefit of the human person. So the individual human person can never be neglected. And that's why later on in the semester we will break down and dismiss a utilitarian idea, the idea that really what's at stake is the greatest good for the greatest number of people at the expense of the few. That is simply not the case. The individual human person must be held above the society at all times, which is what governs decisions like capital punishment, a just war, and other things. Basically, no higher unit of society can have any reason to undermine the freedom of persons. We see this especially in examples of the family being told what they can and cannot do with their own children because federal law stipulates this and state law stipulates that. Well, that's simply not in their purview. That's a violation of the principle of subsidiarity. And finally, we have the principle of solidarity. The definition of solidarity is the Christian virtue of social charity and friendship. Not just any charity, but social charity specifically, and our friendship with our fellow man. Now, as a virtue, social charity specifically and friendship, it fosters certain actions and dispositions within us, primarily the sub-virtue of generosity. And it makes us generous in both physical and spiritual goods. First of all, because we understand that we as human beings are both physical and spiritual beings. We are body soul composites. As such, there is particular goods towards which our body is oriented to flourish and find its fulfillment. Air, water, nutrition, general health, so on and so forth. And then there are spiritual goods, the intellectual goods, seeking those things which are true, which are good, which are beautiful. Education. These things are all spiritual goods because they are of the intellect and the will, which we saw is part of the spiritual nature of the human person. Because we live in society and because we should seek the good of ourselves, but as we're communal persons, we should also seek the good of others, which means we should, at the very least, show solidarity towards them. We should have a generous nature by which we share physical and spiritual goods for the benefit, and so that no human person is denied their dignity. And all of this can be seen theologically in the lens of the fact that all stem from one creator. God is Father of all humans. And as Father of all humans, that makes us all brothers and sisters. And so there should be a fraternal charity, as the church has typically called it, as opposed to social charity. But there's a fraternal charity between all human beings, which is why we should mourn the loss of human life no matter what. We should grieve the depraved actions of others, especially when the dignity of the human person is denied. And we should be willing to not only offer up our spiritual goods, whether it be prayers, or intentions, but also our physical goods, the physical well-being. We should be able to sacrifice ourselves physically and with our physical possessions in order to benefit others.